Hey everybody, this is Michelle.
And this is Julie.
Welcome to a Blonde, a Brunette, and a Mike podcast. What is our podcast all about, you ask?
Well, we're two 50-something women with life experience and, plenty to say.
Which is exactly what we're going to do right now.
Well, hello everyone and welcome to our episode today. We are introducing Kate Schroeder, who is a licensed therapist and a friend of ours, who is going to chat with us today about some of the things she experiences in her practice, and just we're going to learn a little bit more about what she does and how she helps people. Please welcome Kate.
Thank you for having me, both of you. Suffice it to say, I'm a licensed professional therapist, and I work with clients all over, actually. I've been doing this for 15 years now, private practice, and before that, quite a bit, before that, about 8 to 10 years. And ever since I was a little kid, I knew I wanted to be a therapist, so the fact that I ended up here doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, I'm glad to be here because this is such a great conversation to have. Timing, I think, there is such a need for us to talk about mental health related issues because, it's such a critical part, thankfully, and I don't know if this is only because of the pandemic, but I definitely think it kicked it up into higher awareness. But, our emotional, mental health is as important as the physical health. And so it's high time, in my opinion, that we're having these discussions. And yeah, when we talked about kind of what do you want to talk about on the show and everything, the question of what do you see the most of, and I mean, I certainly could blurt out all these different kinds of conditions and, presenting problems and things like that. But really, if I had to answer the core, it's trauma, trauma, trauma. Trauma, trauma, trauma.
I hear and I'm learning about trauma in my adult life, and really just over the last couple of years because of different circumstances. But it's such an interesting word, trauma, because when I first started hearing about trauma, I didn't really identify trauma in my life, really, or in my kids' life. But over the last few years, I've come to realize there's been some trauma.
Yeah.
Because you think about trauma for me, and it seems like really horrible, bad stuff.
Right. That's how I've always identified with it too. And it could be like little things, right?
Which is trauma. We're going to ask the therapist. We're all starting to do this whole self-analysis.
Yeah, go for it.
Trauma, from what I'm learning, trauma for a child can be feeling the anxiety of not having money. Mm-hmm. That they hear the conversations coming from parents, and they feel that stress and anxiety, and then they too, and it can become a thing.
100%. Yeah. Trauma. When I talk about trauma, I like to think about it as all it really takes for something to be traumatic is something happens and you can't have your full feeling about it. So you can't have the amount of the feeling, the kind of feeling, the duration. Somehow you have to shut down at some point in that experience. And, we all have little things, not necessarily traumatic things, but things that, we might have to kind of take a minute to process because of life. But trauma is really something that develops when there isn't the adequate emotional space and support to process through what's happening. And so, there's certainly big T trauma. So things like, being in a house fire or, natural disasters or chronic oppression and minority issue kinds of work. Or there can be sort of the little T traumas, which are much more of what I think is, I don't want to say more prevalent, but I think it's the stuff that we as a society discount because it happens all day long, and I don't believe intentionally. I mean, I don't think people are walking around trying to undermine people's well-being, but it happens unconsciously.
So things like suck it up or
absolutely
man up. Yep. Things like that. When you hear people say that to like a little kid or something,
you're okay.
You're okay. Everything's fine. Don't be a baby.
Absolutely. Or get over it.
Get over it. Yeah.
Get over it. Or, that's just the way. Here's another one, which I think is a huge microaggression that we don't realize, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
That's a huge.
I've said that before plenty of times.
Huge thing.
It's kind of like, in my mind, that's kind of accepting what's happening in front of you. Me as an adult, I never really said that as a kid.
Yeah.
But I don't remember anybody saying that to me as a kid either. But that's kind of more of a today statement, I think you hear.
Yeah. I think it's the more modern version of get over it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it is what it, and I think it's the energy too, right? I mean, there is sometimes an acceptance when we look at life in front of us and we go, well, this is where I'm at right now, versus the energy when somebody is kind of, somebody's having a hard time and you turn to them and you say, well, it is what it is. It's always about the energy of it. And, there are plenty of things that can happen in life that don't end up having to be traumatic, but instead can be life changing, as long as you have the support to move through that and to have your feelings. And, the funny thing about feelings is they're not really that big of a hairy deal. I mean, they become a big hairy deal because of all the ways we twist and contort and everything else inside away from feeling uncomfortable things. But in their essence, they're not complicated. They're very simple. They're discrete. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, as long as we have the supports to move through them. So, yeah, trauma. That's
probably the biggest issue, I would think, because if you think about generationally, people not having the skill set to be able to process their feelings, then they're having children, and those children are not going to be guided, in the same way. And I don't know when things start to change. I mean, I think as a kid, it's going to be very different, like 20 years ago, maybe, than it would be today. Like, I think what I run across a lot is the stigma of mental health and of trying to express your feelings. And like, say, and I go to male more at this point, because I think that men or boys are not given the same opportunity to have feelings or to express them. And so they seem more stunted or have more difficulty communicating about things, or they feel like they're weak, or like they are.
If they do that.
Right. If they do. That. So when you see men doing that, it's kind of nuts. It's not something you see all the time.
Jeez, I have 4 boys.
I know. But think about your 4 boys and how they communicate and convey their feelings. Yeah. I mean, they are so different with how they've done that, and they grew up in the same household. So
yeah. And every kid's personality is different, right? Yeah. And everything, kind of their center of security is different. So what might make this kid over here feel really safe and secure may not even touch it with a 10-foot pole for this kid. So, trauma is relative too. It's what we perceive as being slighted in some way, and it's unique to each person. And, to speak back to the thing around males and difficulty with emotions, without a doubt, I feel still, and I see it in my practice too, and people that I work with and teach and things, I think it still is very difficult for men to have as much support in the world to cry, say, for example, or to be vulnerable. And it's sad to me. But it's not just men only. I mean, I think there are plenty of women out there too, and all kinds of people, however a person identifies or expresses themselves, where it really comes down to there isn't the emotional adeptness inside to feel what they need to feel. Mm-hmm. And there's a fantastic book out called Better Boys, Better Men. And it does such a great job, I think, of talking about the feeling process. Now, certainly, if you listen to the title, it is written towards men and males for sure. But it's a fantastic book for anybody who was taught to kind of toughen up and get through it and do it. It's a great book. I mean, so yeah, feelings are different for everybody. What makes people happy doesn't make them happy. It varies from person to person. So what I see a lot in my practice right now, and I think the topic we need to be really exploring more is trauma. And it's not even so much all the kind of traditional trauma things, but this idea of complex trauma, which is trauma that is based from developmental relational pieces in a person's life. And it shows up one way or another later in our lives, developmentally, when we try to have relationships or work through conflicts or keep jobs or even our own relationship to ourselves. So complex trauma is a big thing that I see in my practice.
Do you see that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but this has always been kind of my understanding, is that the time frame when you're little, 3, maybe 4 years old, when you really can remember things, up until like 8 or 9, little things can happen in there that can kind of formulate your personality or how you respond. Is that, and then that can carry on because that's when is that true as far as your learning and what you're growing up to understand?
Absolutely. I mean, different schools have different thoughts, right? But I think the common consensus now is that our earliest years really shape the rest of our life. Here's the really, I think, fascinating thing, but this is my jam, this is my job, this is what I do, that we can hold trauma even from pre-verbal experiences. And before explicit memory was developed, we hold implicit memories around unpleasant things in our bodies too.
Like
so,
how you felt.
100%.
Like when something took place or something happened.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's really, I think, a pretty neat thing because it's pre-verbal. So that's why a lot of times traditional talk therapy isn't going to scratch that itch because you're working with an implicit experience in your body that's been saved in your body. Our body is like our emotional hard drive. Every experience we've ever had is in our body.
Mm-hmm.
So working with implicit trauma, it takes a different approach. It's the talk stuff isn't going to get there.
So what would you do instead? I mean, because that's all I've ever known about is talk therapy.
Yeah.
I guess I know that there's other types of therapy, I guess.
Yeah. So the funny thing is what was that? What was the movie with Bill Murray? Lost in Translation? Was that the movie? Way long ago. Anyway, they're speaking different languages and they couldn't communicate. It's kind of what's happening, or what happens a lot, I think, in the mental health field, because feelings aren't cognitive thoughts. Thoughts are cognitive. Feelings are experiences. They're energetic experiences in our body. So if we want to get to the core of why people are depressed or anxious or have addictions or whatever, which are, patterns and things that I see in my practice, we have to be able to get down to the feeling themselves, which we can't get to with words. It's in a place that's deeper than words. It's older than time. So we have to, in my opinion, the most successful shifting has to happen with experiential work. There's lots of different ways, right? There's body-centered gestalt work, which I believe deeply in. Somatic experiencing is another one. Even looking at things like internal family systems, which helps you understand the context of how a person came to be who they are. But feelings are experiences. That's why talk therapy is only going to get you so far. And I'm not bashing talk therapy at all because it's a really important piece for a lot of people in terms of really beginning to peel back the layers and get a sense of who they are and how they've become to be that way. But if we really want to deeply transform, you have to get deeper than the language and the words. And so, that's a whole nother multiple series of podcasts on that. But, feeling a feeling is really different than talking about it or thinking about it. It's a whole different experience. And the cool thing about that is that feelings, they're sort of our emotional GPS. Mm-hmm. So, the feelings that show up that we all are like, oh, I'm so glad it's going to be that kind of day. I feel so good today. Those are certainly important feelings, but equally important are the feelings that show up on the day when you wake up and you go, oh, this is going to be one of those days. Like, we need both sets of feelings.
Well, in order to have a high, you need a low. And you need to have something that gives you that gauge, right?
Do those, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking the whole cognitive and emotional as a feeling and experience, that just kind of turned the light off.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
But can the cognitive thoughts dictate what kind of day you're going to have? Like, do you see that correlation? Like, if I wake up and I'm feeling sleepy and like I'm dragging and I don't want to get going, if I sit there and mentally with those cognitive thoughts, like, come on, you can do this, it's going to be a great day. Is there a correlation there? Can those cognitive thoughts help with a better experience? You know what I'm saying?
I do. It's a great question. So, I like to think about thoughts and feelings as sort of like a pilot and ground control, right? That our feelings actually are where need comes from.
Okay.
And our thoughts are there to help us figure out how to get that. So the problem is when we put cognition before feeling. A lot of times we do this now, like, well, what's logical? What makes the most sense? And now let me run it by and see how I feel about it. Versus the other way that goes, what do I really want to need based on what I'm feeling? And okay, now that I've got that figured out, let me get my brain involved to help me figure out the logistics. So can cognitive thoughts help us? I mean, people, certainly have supports and, meditation and daily readings and things like that, which I think are great. But the problem is that unless we really get down to the core of learning how to feel, we're going to keep, we may get really lucky and
really allowing yourself to feel, I would
and
imagine.
a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, in some ways, I think that there's a potential to do what they kind of call spiritual bypassing, which is more like skipping the hard work and just feeling better. That for some people, that's enough. They're
Not
good
even
with that.
happen though. Really, if you're at the core, if at the core of it, you're not able to unpack whatever it is that's creating those feelings, then how could you skip them over unless you leave them in the box with a little lock on them, which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think in those cases, when people kind of choose that path for themselves, life becomes, it's not that you can't have a fine life that way, but it becomes kind of keeping the house of cards in place, right?
Yeah.
So let me really hope nothing crazy goes down, or I don't lose my job, or my kids do what I tell them, or like life becomes a little more tenuous in that way because there's not that deeper, solid foundation that you can stand on that says, hey, I know no matter what, not only am I going to be able to get to the core of what I'm really feeling, but I'm going to be able to do what I need to do to take care of myself and move towards that peace. So, I think that is what is kind of cool is I think that there is a shift starting to happen now where people are seeing that, at least in the mental health field, we need something different.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else because we just keep going around the loop. And I've never been one that says, hey, I'm going to help you catch a fish. I'm much more interested in teaching you how to fish because then you're going to be fine no matter what. So it also kind of depends on people's approaches. I think things like yoga, meditation, daily readings, affirmations, all that stuff is great, but I see them more as supports than as actually taking that deeper step into where they need to go.
Like eating healthy food.
Exactly.
Support for your body.
Right.
Fantastic.
The meditation, those things are
support. That actually is a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And some people are okay stopping there. Some people are like, that's fine by me. I'm doing pretty good. Things are okay. I've been sober whatever years or whatever, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I think for people who continually they struggle or they feel frustrated or unsatisfied, that's kind of the deeper call inside of them that's saying, you need to go deeper. Mm-hmm. And those are the people I really like to work with, the ones that say, they never, although I do occasionally get folks who come in and say, I need to turn everything upside down. But usually people come into my practice to help because they want to feel better. Mm-hmm. They want to get through something. And so one of the first things I always like to kind of go through with people is that therapy isn't about feeling better. It's about getting better at feeling. And that's what I'm going to help you do. Because when you get better at feeling and being with all your feelings, you're going to actually feel better.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So then you're not afraid of your feelings because you're able to confront them head on.
Exactly. Yeah. And so even in that, a very simple practice or exercise I ask people to do is to take a minute and think back to one of their hardest things in their childhood or their past and how was their support around it? Like, could they cry and cry and cry? Or was it okay for them to be frightened? Or did people try to fix them or make them feel better? And that's going to tell them a lot about what they unconsciously do inside. And the coolest part about this is that 90% of what hangs us up in our life is unconscious. It's like we don't have any idea.
Yeah.
We think it's an outside job, and rarely is our issue an outside job. Like if I made more money or if this person was nicer to me. Not that those things aren't important. They certainly have an impact on us. But 90% of why we're stuck or having a hard time in our life is something inside. I call that the inside job. We have to turn in and go in there. And finding somebody who can help you go there is so essential. And people are like, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? I'm like, well, imagine the worst possible thing you'd want to feel. And that's probably where you need to go, towards that direction inside. It's going to be really counterintuitive. It's not going to be the worst. It's not going to kill you. If it were, you wouldn't be here right now. So I always tell people growth looks like what feels most counterintuitive in that moment, that there's a decent chance that there's something about growth in that. That it's not as cut as dry and dried as that to say, well, I'm going to only do counterintuitive things. But it is a clue that says, there's something that direction that is probably important for me to look at and explore. And so I think that's a big piece in the therapy process, is helping people build enough emotional stamina, emotional muscles inside to be able to go to those hard places. And it takes work. It's like learning anything, right? If you wanted to learn to play a musical instrument, you have to start practicing.
Right.
And if emotions are the same thing, we have to practice. We have to learn and practice with support how to feel our feelings. Usually the hard feelings, because most people, I've never had anybody come into my practice and say, I feel so much joy and I want to pay you money every week to just, I can tell you how great my life is. They come in because they're like, I'm struggling.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you find that avoidance is a huge issue?
It can be.
Because of that uncomfortableness?
Yes.
That people are just like, they don't want to go there. They don't want to do, they know they need to. Of course, I'm speaking for myself here.
Well,
do you think they're avoiding? I don't know, Julie.
Well, you tell me. Yeah, exactly. Well, tell your friend that, yes, kicking the can down the road, avoiding whatever you want to call it. But I don't see that necessarily as a problem. In the sense, as long as we're conscious about what we're doing and we have support to that. Because, what I call kind of that place where you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
Like, there's stuff you need to deal with or a next step you need to take, and you just can't quite do that yet. I call that kind of a place of impasse. And it's actually critical in the growth process is to get support to live through impasse. Now, the key word there is support, because when we're at impasse and we're just drinking too much, spending too much money, whatever it is, the thing we do to kind of anesthetize ourselves. Mm-hmm. Impasse is just suffering. It's just uncomfortable. It's dissatisfying, whatever. But when we can live impasse with support and growing awareness around, I'm not taking that step because someplace inside of me doesn't know, my muscles aren't ready. I don't have enough muscles inside to lift that emotional thing up and open it up and look at it. So I work with that in a whole different way. I mean, the truth is you could take a horse to water, you can't make him drink anyway. Somebody may know I need therapy, and they've been saying that for 20 years. And what they need most is not people who go, hell yeah, you do. They need people who are like, absolutely. And when you're ready, you'll get that. It's funny, right? It's the paradox of change. The more we try to change, the more stuck we're going to stay. Whereas when we can learn to support where we are, even if we're not happy about it, we actually end up beginning to shift and grow. And so I always say, dissatisfaction without support is just suffering, but dissatisfaction with support leads to growth.
So when you're talking support, are we talking like therapeutic support, family support, or just anything in general? Like the things that we're doing with yoga or meditation, all that kind of stuff?
That's a piece of it. But go ahead.
I think it looks different for everybody. Person. It's going to be different. And I think it's important. And of course, as we're sitting here, I'm thinking of circumstances in my own life, people in my own life, situations in my own life. And there's a lot of different situations, and each one of those have different ways of supporting it. As a mother, I have different ways of supporting my children based on whatever it is that they might be going through, however it is that they're going through it. And my support for a family member is going to be different than maybe how their siblings is going to be able to support them. There's so many different, I think that's how I would see it anyways.
As a mom, but then just as like a woman, just as a person, it's like, where do you glean support from? Where do you gather all of that from? I mean, it could be your family, but there's a lot of things you don't necessarily share with your children, for example, because it's just stuff you don't share with them.
Yeah. I think it's the same that I'm thinking, this is so interesting, like just as you're talking about it. Because I'm thinking of different things with really close friends. Like I think things with you, things with Eileen, things, Stephanie, all these different women that I have in my life. And honestly, I support each one of you so differently.
Yeah.
And I think I get the same from each of those people. I get a different kind of support from them to me that is how they can do that for me. And each one is different.
Everybody, I guess, has their strengths too and what they bring. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. Your dad takes a village.
Even when you're an adult, it takes a village, right?
For sure. Our need for connection doesn't go away as an adult. Like we still need I mean, the difference, we have all the same needs that we had when we were children. The difference is I don't need you to tie my shoe now, but I still need help. I don't need you to remind me to brush my teeth, but I still need connection. Or if I have to do a hard thing, I still need, people to help me work through that. And so I think support it can absolutely be external. The piece I think that's also really important and key is that we need support. We need to build the internal support inside too. Meaning, for example, I've worked with plenty of people who really smart, brilliant people, highly capable in their professional lives and things like that, but they struggle personally over and over and over, right? Or they get themselves in a situation and are like, I can't believe I did this again. How many times have I done this thing? And it's like, first of all, it's not a brain thing. It's not logic. It's nothing rational, clearly, because you don't want to be there, but you ended up there again.
Yeah.
So by that very nature, there must be something important happening here, or else why would we be doing the thing we don't want to do? People who say, I should give up smoking, or I should, stop drinking or exercise more or whatever. It's like, we know that. We wouldn't be saying that out loud if we didn't know that. But there's something that we're lacking inside at that point, to take that next step in the direction that would really make us feel good. And as odd as that sounds, it's the truth. Like, if we're not doing something we know would help us or make us feel better, there's something really important going on. So I think a big piece of what I love to help people do is kind of crack their own code. Like, everything we do, folks, has meaning. Every single thing we do.
Whether we realize it or not.
Consciously and unconsciously. And in fact, 90% of the unconscious is running our show. So we're better served not trying to figure out a different behavior or how to talk to ourselves a different way kind of thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we're far better served in learning our own unconscious language, because all day long we're communicating unconsciously about what's working, what's not working, what we need more of, what we need less of. But we've learned to ignore that part of ourselves and only be with the rational logic. Makes sense. This is what I should do, so I'm going to force
more
myself.
comfortable.
And the thing is it doesn't usually stick. I mean, and when somebody's really struggling, and they cold turkey, whatever that is, rarely does that stick. And if it does, it's usually a pretty traumatic experience for them. So, and I'm not saying for some people going cold turkey isn't it, but what I have seen is that sustainable change happens by the inside, going inside and saying, okay, I'm stuck. I'm in this thing, this pattern. It's not, helping me. And I guess I probably don't have enough internal support yet to take the next step. And that's where a ton of work can happen for somebody, because usually when a person's there, they're beating themselves up and they're feeling shame or embarrassed or judgmental towards themselves. Usually there's a lot of negativity toward ourselves, which actually makes us want to do more of that thing we're trying not to do, because we feel like crap. So it's about beginning to work with that. And that's one of the things that I love with the Gestalt work that I do, is helping people start to get separate from that negativity and judgment towards themselves inside first, because we can't walk through trauma if we're getting hammered every time we try to take a step. First, we have to deal with, and that's where the support work starts to happen, is we start to work on quieting down that negativity inside. And it's not magic and hocus pocus. It's hard work of feeling things and stepping into the center of hard things before we can even begin then to address the original kinds of experiences that happened. So, support is, I think it's common for it to start externally. But a piece, for example, of an internal support for somebody who's stuck in a loop that they're like, I've been doing this for 50 years. What am I doing? An example of an internal support that would grow for them would be to be able, when they get to that place and realize it, to be able to actually be really compassionate towards themselves. And or if they can't, to be able to reach out to somebody who can be compassionate towards them. Because it's like you said, Michelle, like, we can't heal and grow and change without connection.
Right.
We just can't. We're a social species.
Yeah.
So we're not going to take those steps, especially not into hard play. Think about your kids when they were young and you said, you need to go in that dark room with no lights and put your pajamas on. They look at you like, what?
No.
No. So that's the thing, right? It's kind of like doing that for people is, we're going to go into the dark places together though. Like you're not going to get stuck. That's the thing is that, people who are really, just kind of their life is just this really hard experience that it's sad to me in the sense that somewhere along the line, they didn't get the support they needed to actually move through the feelings, and that our system can fail them so much sometimes, the mental health world that says, well, think something different, or track your thoughts, or do more yoga, or like, that's great, but those are Band-Aids, which we need, right? If my arm's bleeding on the way to the hospital, I might need a Band-Aid, but we got to do better.
Can you elaborate on, is it gestalt? Like you mentioned that. So can you just explain or give some history on what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So, that's been my kind of cornerstone, even all the way back to grad school. Gestalt is really about exploring, and I say gestalt, some people say gestalt, whatever. It's about exploring the here and now as what I call kind of a doorway into something from our past that's gotten us hung up. Here's the other thing that I think is really fascinating. It took me a long time to learn this personally. But when our focus is on somebody else, like what they're doing or not doing, that is an indication that we're in a very defended place. When our focus leaves us and goes outside of ourselves, and if my partner would just take the trash out, or if my kid would keep their job, or my whatever, like we're no longer in here. And so it took me a while to learn that.
So we're no longer in here because we're externalizing our frustrations. So it's keeping us from really focusing on the things that we need to focus on for ourselves.
Yeah, well, it's what we do to get out of a feeling, because feelings happen in our bodies. So the particular kind of gestalt work that I do is very much about connecting back into our bodies and understanding that. I get clients often who find me, it's not because necessarily I'm a gestalt therapist, but they find me because they have a lot of physical pain that Western medicine can't touch, Eastern medicine can't touch. Like they've been doing everything they can, but their body is talking, it's somatizing big time. And so rarely do we not get to a place because of that body pain where we really can touch some deep healing. And then 9 out of 10 times their physical stuff goes away. And it's not magic.
Mind is such a powerful thing,
Absolutely. It's so, and that's one of the things I think we love about kids, right? Is they're pretty connected still. They're body, mind, spirit. Like they don't think, they just do stuff. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes you're going to pull your hair out. But like that spontaneity and aliveness is wonderful. And so I feel like that's a lot of what we've lost connection with is our aliveness inside. And I feel really lucky to be able to help people clear the clutter out and get back to that, because that's key. And what I find is that a lot of the source of our distress, whatever it is, depression, anxiety, addictions, eating disorders, you name it, is because of unmet need, unmet developmental need, that if we didn't fully resolve it, we bring that forward into our life. And then usually we project a little bit on our kids and our partners and our friends and our neighbors, which isn't a problem. That's part of being human too, that, you wave at a friend across the street and they don't wave back and you're like, I wonder what's going on. Are they okay? Projection's not a problem. It's just when we live as if it's true, we don't go check it out. You don't call that friend up and go, hey, did you see me the other day? I waved at you. Or are we good? Like, is everything okay? Like, we just assume whatever we assume.
As a parent,
right?
My children, right? It's their adult lives, some of the decisions, and there's just so many different things, and it's like, then it brings on a lot of self-reflection and trying to figure out what the heck, without going into details. But because there's a lot of, I'm learning. I don't necessarily want to say responsibility, but it has caused self-reflection for me. And like, maybe it wasn't as easy breezy. I've obviously put a lot out of my head from
but survival. A lot of that's just kind of survival. It's like keeping your head above water. You're just kind of doing what you need to do. I just think about being like a young parent or working in the corporate world and, being the superwoman kind of a thing. You're not really doing yourself any favors.
Right.
You're trying to be too many things to too many people, and it turns into other stuff where you're not able to really cope with it. It can be. It certainly can be. I don't know. I think you're right. When I think about like my children, for example, because that's obviously what I have to go on, but
Yeah.
they're so different. And the way that they communicated and conveyed their feelings was so different. So like, for example, my youngest, he's kind of he's very quiet now as an adult, but he was the one that was the most emotional and the most conveyed the most loving and tenderness and everything as a child. He was very much that way. Zoe, she'd get away with as much as she could. She was not that way. She was actually more like me. And then my oldest just didn't say anything. He just wouldn't really communicate at all. So, but he also was the one who had, I think, more what we call trauma, more trauma. He was really very well disciplined or very strict. It was a little bit goosier, I think, with the other two. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, they all have, like I said, they've grown up to be so different. Yeah. And I don't know that we did anything different for each of them, is what I'm saying. I don't remember saying, oh gosh, well, you have to have things the same way that you do, or I communicate or support you in the same way that I do with the other one. I don't remember any of that, but
I think we learn things along the way.
Yeah.
There's a lot more shake up with the older ones are older and the younger ones are younger. I just experienced that being youngest of 8. I know. It's like, my parents didn't wait up for me. And it's like they did. There was just like way less restrictions around so many things, being the youngest. But
well, and I think too, I mean, as a younger parent, you're stressed. Like you've never done this before.
Yeah.
Like
you're supposed to know all the answers.
And you're supposed to know all the answers. And like,
intuitively.
Right. And raise these perfect children. And it's like, what pressure? I mean, talk about pressure.
Well, and the whole thing about the perfect child or what you're deemed in society as doing as a parent, like a working parent and all those things, it weighed on me a ton.
I believe that.
When my kids were growing up. And, I think we did a pretty good job with them. I mean, your kids are great. My kids are doing really well too. So, but they have their own little trauma. And it's funny how, I hear, like with Zoe will just tell me what she remembers or what we did or didn't do or what have you. And I'm just kind of like, wow, I hadn't heard things from that person, not mean or anything like that, but it's from her perspective.
It's very different.
Yeah, than what I thought it was.
Interesting. Yes. Hindsight's 20/20, right? But it's hard in those moments, when your kid's about to stick a fork in the light socket and this other one's losing their mind and you're like, I'm just going to do the best I can. And that's another big thing that I think really can create a lot of trauma. Like you were saying, Julia, that it felt like a lot of pressure that I got to do a certain thing with my kids because, we've got to take judgment out of feeling. There is no such thing as right and wrong in this world in the sense of if I do this, this is right. And if I do this, this is wrong. They're just different decisions that are going to have different impacts and maybe more and less dissatisfying and maybe more or less in line with your integrity and your values and your morals. But, from a feeling perspective, the only place right and wrong shows up in all of existence is math.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Yeah. It's not right if you do this and it's wrong if you do this, We do the best we can. And that's, I think, the other really huge piece of transformation that can happen for people is not only with yourself, because, what often happens with clients that I work with who have children and things, that they'll grow to a certain place and then it'll hit, dawn like, oh crap, I did this to my kids. I think the key takeaway is finding something, and Gestalt is one path for that takes you below the cognition and down into the actual feelings of it. Because really the core is we need to learn how to move toward all of our feelings, including the not fun ones, if we really want to change something fundamental in our life. And, that brings up a whole nother area of exploration around, psychedelic therapy and things like that, which is amazing.
So talk to us about that. I know that's kind of a new thing that's out there, right?
Yes.
You're learning all about that.
I am. I'm getting certified in it to be able to do the journeys with clients and things like that. So it's so profound and it's interesting because in the very beginning, I don't even know now, 6-7 years ago, I had clients who would bring it up and they'd ask me about it. And I didn't really give it a lot of stock because to me, it felt so different and unusual. And in the Midwest, I was in the Midwest at the time. So, the chances of that happening there are that's going to be the last place.
So she moves to the West Coast.
So I moved to the progressive areas where I can have an opportunity to do more of this. But it's amazing because if we're talking about getting beyond the words and beyond the cognition and down into, in most cases, the implicit memory of what we went through and what shaped us, both lovely and not so lovely. Like psychedelics are just an amazing tool for doing that. And, Michelle, we were talking a little bit about how I think one of the first ideas that people think about with psychedelics is, oh yeah, I did them when I was in college, or I did them at a party once or whatever. And that you may have had a great experience, you may not have had a great experience, but the difference is when you do them therapeutically, that it's a very structured, intentional, lots and lots of hours working with somebody. I had an experience last fall. I did some of it myself to get a sense of that for my clients. And I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but it was literally like doing 10 years of therapy in 6 hours. And it wasn't even like longitudinal therapy. It was like depth work, which is amazing because
was it scary?
Initially it was. I'd never done anything like that before.
You don't really know what you're going to.
Yeah, but I was wanting that. I had felt kind of like in a place of impasse in kind of the bigger picture of life. Like I needed and had just made a gigantic, change in my life. But I was bumping up against the limits of ordinary consciousness.
Right.
And this is coming from somebody who's, does therapy on the regular and group therapy. I'm down for all of it. It took me to places implicitly where, I was able to get in touch with grief, things that I'd tucked away in my body from, I think, very early on, even pre-verbal kinds of places. So it was amazing. I wanted that, though, I think it's healthy to have a little bit of concern or questioning about it because you are opening Pandora's box.
Right. That's what I'm wondering.
That's the thing.
Do you remember after the therapy, do you remember what you experienced? Like the details? I
don't remember all the details because it was such an experience, like a non-ordinary it's really hard to talk about something ineffable like that and put it into words. But my sitter had, taken some notes and things along the way, which again, I think is part of doing this therapeutically is that you actually have someone who's trained to be there with you, to be witness and to hear the things and the themes, because for me, that's really important to be able to go back and kind of revisit these things. I remember some images. I remember the feeling. And what's so cool is I was able to go to some of these really hard feelings without getting stuck in all this fear and, kind of wanting to go the other direction. We talked about growth is counterintuitive. It's like it allowed me to go into those counterintuitive places without the fear. And, I had to have a lot of support to do that. And so I think we have to be really careful about that too, because this isn't just a party game. Like it's not just, hey, let's go, take mushrooms and listen to some music. Yeah, exactly. Because and that's where people then get re-traumatized, is when they drop into feeling experiences, old trauma that they don't have the internal supports to process, that's where things can get really difficult.
I would imagine there's stuff, I know we were talking about it a little bit, that is critical for the before.
Yes.
And the things that are happening during and then after.
Absolutely.
So having that, to your point earlier, that's got to be some of the supports through that process.
Absolutely.
That are key in how that turns out.
Absolutely. 100%. Like the setting, the container that you create, the pre-work to, help really get to know what a client is, listening to what they're wanting. And it's not just the verbal words or the audible sounds they're making, but listening in a deep way to what they're asking for and assessing, like, what are their supports? Where are they at? What kinds of things do you need to be thoughtful about while they go through this journey and experience? So it is, if done therapeutically, I think it really, and it's worth it. Right now, because it's still so new and things, it is pricey for people to do. And hopefully that's going to change so much with insurance and stuff. The really cool thing that I think probably so far just been profound is how behind this the military is, and that they're on board. They've done the research. They've validated,
because there's so many people that have PTSD.
You got it. Yeah. You got it. And so
they're getting medicated So there's the whole
And
big
it's
pharma
costly.
aspect of it.
And it's ongoing, costly care and sustainable. But their only question now is, how do we implement this?
Mhm.
And so it's kind of exciting because, when I think about that, I think if we've got that big vehicle running the show, that maybe we'll get to a place where insurances are beginning to look at this as necessary as antibiotics and, psychotropic medications and things. I mean, ketamine is legal everywhere now, and some insurances are paying for their various forms of ketamine, esketamine and things like that, which is a derivative, and it's a whole other discussion. It still can bring a lot of change for people, but my hope is that
Is that a psychedelic?
well, it's not a class. It's not a classic psychedelic, but they group it into psychedelics.
Okay. I've heard of
It's-
it before. I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah, it's more of a disassociative, which again is kind of what you get in some of the psychedelic,
Right.
classical psychedelic, where you can approach these things without all that fear and stuff. So it's a different compound, but actually several psychiatrists that I know, they say now for treatment-resistant depression, all they diagnose or recommend prescribe is ketamine now.
Really?
They don't even do psychotropic meds, especially if a client's been on a couple of different rounds of meds and nothing's shifted, then that's the go-to. So I think this is, well, I don't think it, I know it's going to become the next wave in the mental health field. And I'm so excited to be like on the forefront of this, because this is what we need. We need that deep, profound change. And, one of the coolest things I think I brought back from that journey was, it was not only this experience of being part of something much bigger than our, we look around the room and the table and the computers and our cars and our job, like that is like one blip of our existence. And so it was really, really cool to have a feeling of being connected to something so much bigger, where, that perspective can be powerful too. I think there's something about perspective that helps us shift out of some of the way we get hung up in feelings and things, and like it's such a big thing. It's like having some perspective to realize, like, in another lifetime, I'm not even going to remember this one. Whatever your belief is around that stuff. But it's profound. I mean, so I brought that piece back. And then the other piece, I think, which was so cool, is a validation for the necessity of deeply living, of feeling things deeply and having the ability to walk through that. It's like we all feel things deeply, whether we're aware of it or not. So, I mean, I could talk forever about that experience. It was so profound. But, my hope is, so psilocybin is legal in Oregon right now, but it looks like MDMA is going to be the next one to be legalized.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Yeah, probably, hopefully August of this year. Yeah, I know, which is pretty cool too, because it's a whole different entheogen itself, whereas psilocybin might be more about the depth work. MDMA, although you can do a lot of depth work on it, there's also an element of connection around it, which I think can be really powerful for people too, because a lot of we're isolated. We're lonely, we're lonely with ourselves. We've lost our connection to ourselves. And so, we have to work on that piece critically in that way too. So, and then there's lots of other sort of smaller compounds, but those are kind of the big three that you hear a lot about. I mean, there's ibogaine and ayahuasca and some of these, 5-MeO-DMT, lots of stuff like
I've
that.
heard of the ayahuasca one.
Yeah. So yeah, it's important. This is what I'm talking about, doing the depth work, and being able to process, because 90% of the show is ran from our unconscious. So why not learn how to go there and communicate with it and crack its code, So yeah, there's a lot of exciting things about that.
So let me ask you, it's like, people come to therapy, they seek you out, but have you experienced where you have people that you're working with that are just, there's like a brick wall, and then you have to kind of try to figure out how to get through the brick wall, or they don't want to be there, or husband's making them do it, or what, you know what I mean? It's not, it's not their choice, but they're there. Yeah. Do you see that people will make progress in those circumstances after a while? Maybe they become more open-minded about things, or see that, it's helping them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've had occasional situations where a client may have been motivated to come from something outside of themselves, where as they've been there, something clicks inside for them, and they're like, oh, I need to be here. But I think what's more common is that if somebody's being kind of, I say, quote unquote, mandated to be there, right? I'm going to leave the marriage if you don't go to therapy, or court mandated, or whatever. It's not that folks like that can't make progress, but much of the work at that point is just going to be helping them support themselves, whether they're say, I don't want this, or growing the emotional muscles inside to get to a place where we can even begin to, it's kind of called like befriending our defense system. We hear those words, defense system, and they sound like such bad words. Honestly, we need our defense system. I'm so glad we have them.
It's
all
like
of
a survival. It's a
100%
inherent survival technique.
It's it's like our skin, right? We need our skin. It protects us. And so does our defense system. So it's not about, I want to get rid of that and I don't want to be defensive. It's more, I want to know when I'm defensive. And so I can take a moment and dive in and figure out what I'm defending against. And when I sort that out inside of me, my defensiveness will naturally go away. Like when I can feel, safe enough inside, and I've worked through whatever needs to be worked through. So to me, defensiveness is not a bad thing. It's a clue. It's important. Whether it's in a relationship with someone in just a certain place in your life, it's important. So it's about working with that. So yeah, people who show up there because somebody else told them they need to be there. Sometimes this is their lifetime, and sometimes it's not, and they still need support for that.
Right.
And I've found, honestly, and I don't have an agenda. Like, it's not my job to fix anybody. Really, it's not even my job to help anybody. It's my job to help them help themselves. And so when clients are coming and they're even looking at me to help them feel better, often what that indicates to me is that they're in a very young, emotional place. And so,
or maybe they don't understand what therapy, what it's supposed to do, or because they think I'm paying you to help me figure out the stuff, or to figure it out for me, or
So it's one of the things I love most about the work is it's so unique to every single person, and I don't believe there are quote unquote impossible cases. Like, I just don't think that. If you're able to work with a person's defense system, and it's not even like to try to get the defense system to break down.
Right.
It's working with their defense system to understand how important it is, no judgment. The goal is not to take away the thing you don't want right now, because if we do that, you're going to implode.
Yeah.
Let's figure out why that thing's here, what it's protecting you from feeling, and let's take baby steps into that feeling. All along the way, you're the boss. Like, you get to say yes or no. It's amazing how transformation can happen. And sometimes for some clients, a bulk of their therapy work might be from a place of impasse. I mean, I'm talking about years and years and years, and then they'll get something, and their whole life shifts. I mean, it doesn't.
It's like a light bulb moment, almost.
100%. Like, and it doesn't always happen that way. But I've never turned down a client who. I mean, I got a client once who showed up who said everybody else had kind of referred them, and I don't know that therapists told them they were a hopeless cause, but that was kind of what they were feeling, because so many people just said, I can't work with you. And I'm like, absolutely, come in.
Yeah.
And now they're doing wonderful. They're like a therapist themselves and like just changing people's lives. So everything we do is important.
Isn't that incredible, though? The work that you do, Kate?
Well, thank you.
I mean, I've actually asked you before, not today, but asked you before. It's like, aren't you just exhausted? Yeah. I would just be so exhausted, like trying to hear everything else that was going on with other people and trying to manage. I mean, obviously I've never done that before, and then have to deal with my own life. I don't think I do a very good job.
Yeah. No, it's
just my friends over red wine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. I've heard about those.
Yeah, the red wine method, that's what we're going to call it.
Which is therapeutic sometimes, Yeah, you know what? I feel really energized by this stuff. I mean, sure, you get tired to do anything 6-7 hours a day, but like, to me, it's the greatest. I get to help people connect back to themselves.
Yeah. And it's kind of, honestly, it's a gift, because it's like not that many people can do it and do it well.
Yeah. It's so amazing. I mean, I use the word excited a lot in therapy, and my clients look at me like, how is this exciting and fun? I'm like, well, just hang in
work
here.
with me.
Hang in here. We're going to say, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, we're learning, I'm getting to help them learn their deepest language and connect back to the part of themselves they lost connection with, like years and years and years and years ago. How is that exhausting?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
just when you see the progress or you see that kind of shift, it's got to just feel so good.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. And
So
yeah.
I've learned that trauma is a thing.
Mhm.
Trauma.
Trauma, capital, big trauma, little trauma.
Yeah.
Yep, big T, little
And
T.
support is.
So Kate, do you have your schedule open? So maybe I need to schedule an appointment.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Yes, I am taking new clients.
I
for sure.
definitely will want to at some point talk to you about some of the therapies that you're learning about.
Yes,
And be one of your
for sure.
people, because I think that would be really cool.
Absolutely. That would be lovely.
So
Yeah, I just, like I said, it's an incredible work that you're doing, that you've done, that you're continuing to learn about, and the ways that are, most impactful for people, especially in the depth of work that there is in all of us. I've just learned that more over the last couple of years. I'm 58 years old. It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So will you come back and visit us again?
Love that.
Okay.
This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been great. I'm kind of like hanging on your words. I'm listening to all the things you're saying. I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense.
Well, and she did mention, Kate, you said you're taking new
Yeah.
patients.
Yeah.
So maybe if we have an email or something.
Sure.
We can definitely share that.
So
Sure.
If anybody is
Absolutely.
interested in connecting with you, so that we can make that happen for them. And if there's anything, because I know for me, there's things in this episode that I'm going to go back and want to revisit and listen to. Absolutely, there will be. So, just download the episode. You can, then find things easier that way. You can find us out on all the socials.
Thank you so much for
Thank
being here
you.
today, and we will definitely have you back again.
I will love that.
So next time, everybody, like to
Say this little thing at the end.
Peace out.
Peace out.
Peace out. Bye, everyone.
Bye.